Welcome back to Ken's Quizzes. Which organ controls thoughts, memory, and body movements? Brain. Which organ transmits signals between the brain and the rest of the body? Spinal cord. Which organ allows you to see and detect light? Eyes. Which organ detects sound and helps with balance? Ears. Which organ detects smells and helps you breathe? Nose. Which organ helps you taste food and speak? Tongue. Which organ pumps blood throughout the body? Heart. Which blood vessels carry oxygen rich blood from heart to your body? Arteries. Which blood vessels carry oxygen poor blood to the heart? Veins. Which tiny blood vessels connect arteries and veins allowing oxygen exchange? Capillaries. Which organs take in oxygen and remove carbon dioxide? Lungs. Which organ carries air to the lungs and is also called the windpipe? Trachea. Which organ houses the vocal cords and helps produce sound? Larynx. Which organ serves as a passage for both air and food? Pharynx. Which tubes connect to the windpipe and bring air into the lungs? Bronchi. Which dome shaped muscle helps you breathe by contracting and relaxing? Diaphragm. Which organ is the entry point for food and helps in digesting and speech? Mouth. Which structures in the mouth grind and break down food? Teeth. Which organs produce saliva to help digest food in the mouth? Salivary glands. Which muscular tube carries food from the mouth to the stomach? Esophagus. Which organ churns food and mixes it with digestive juices? Stomach. Which organ absorbs most nutrients from digested food? Small intestine. Which organ absorbs water and forms feces? Large intestine. Which organ detoxifies the blood and produces bile? Liver. Which organ stores bile by the liver? Gallbladder. Which organ produces insulin and digestive enzymes? Pancreas. Which small organ is attached to the large intestine but has no known essential function? Appendix. Which organ stores feces before they are expelled from the body? Rectum. Which organ is the exit point for waste feces from the body? Anus. Which organs filter waste from blood to produce urine? Kidneys. Which tubes carry urine from the kidneys to the bladder? Ureters. Which organ stores urine before it is expelled from the body? Bladder. Which tube carries urine from the bladder out of the body? Urethra. Which male organs produce sperm and testosterone? Testis. Which male organ is involved in the reproduction and urination? Penis. Which male gland produces alkaline fluid to protect sperm? Prostate. Which gland of the male reproductive system provides sugary fluid that provides energy for sperm? Seminal vesicles. Which tube carries sperm from the testis toward the urethra? Vas deferens. Which organ stores and matures sperm after they are produced in the testes? Epididymis. Which female organs produce eggs and hormones like estrogen? Ovaries. Which organ houses and nourishes a developing fetus during pregnancy? Uterus. Which organ serves as the birth canal and receives sperm during intercourse? Vagina. Which tubes transport eggs from the ovaries to the uterus? Fallopian tubes. Which structure connects the uterus to the vagina and dilates during childbirth? Cervix. Which organs produce milk to nourish infants and females? Mammary glands. Which gland is the master gland that controls other endocrine glands? Pituitary gland. Which gland in the neck produces hormones that regulate metabolism? Thyroid gland. Which small glands regulate calcium levels in the blood? Parathyroid. Which glands produce adrenaline and regulate stress responses? Adrenal glands. Which tiny gland regulates sleep cycles by producing melatonin? Pineal gland. Which gland helps develop T cells for the immune system, especially in children? Thymus. Which organ filters blood and helps fight infections? Spleen. Which organs at the back of the throat help trap germs? Tonsils. Which small structures filter lymph and trap harmful bacteria or viruses? Lymph nodes. Which tissue inside bones produces blood cells, red, white, and platelets? Bone marrow. Which organ is the body's largest and protects against infections, ultraviolet rays, and dehydration? Skin. Which structures grow from follicles and help regulate body temperature and provide protection? Hair. Which hard structures made of keratin protect the tips of fingers and toes? Nails. Which rigid structures form the skeleton and support the body? Bones. Which structure connect bones and allow movement? Joints. Which voluntary muscles help move bones and maintain posture? Skeletal muscles. Which tough tissues connect muscles to bones? Tendons. Which strong tissues connect bones to other bones at joints? Ligaments. Which air-filled cavities in the skull help lighten the head and produce mucus? Sinuses. Which thin membranes surround the lungs and line the chest cavity? Pleura. Which protective sac surrounds and cushions the heart? Pericardium. Which fold of tissues attaches the intestines to the abdominal wall and supplies blood vessels? Mesentery. Which tissue stores energy as fat and cushions organs? Adipose tissue. Which transparent front part of the eye focuses light entering the eye? Cornea. Which light sensitive layer at the back of the eye sends visual signals to the brain? Retina. Which nerve carries visual signals from the retina to the brain? Optic nerve. Which inner ear system helps maintain balance and spatial orientation? Vestibular system. Which tube connects the middle ear to the throat and helps equalize air pressure? Eustachian tube. Which small fleshy structure hangs at the back of the throat and aids in speech and swallowing? Uvula. Which flap of cartilage prevents food from entering the windpipe when swallowing? Epiglottis. Which newly discovered fluid-filled space is found beneath the skin and around organs, potentially acting as a shock absorber? Interstitium. Which small male glands produce pre-ejaculate fluid to neutralize urethral acidity? Bulbourethral glands. Which glands near the vaginal opening produce lubrication during arousal? Bartholin glands. Write your score in the comment box.